The gunshot echoed through Morrison's last stop, and Ethan dove behind the overturned counter as his coffee mug shattered against the wall. Blood trickled from his temple where glass had cut him, but his eyes never left the massive shadow moving between him and the armed men outside. It wasn't supposed to be like this, inheriting a gas station and an 800-pound bear. The front windows exploded inward as boots crunched through debris, automatic weapons sweeping the small store. But Ranger didn't run. The Kodiak bear rose on his hind legs, all 9 feet of him, positioning himself like a living shield between Ethan and death. Dorothy's voice echoed in his memory. "Your daddy left you more than a bear, son. He left you a $200 million secret that some folks would kill for." "Find the veteran!" a voice shouted. "And put that beast down!" Ranger's deep growl vibrated through the floorboards as Ethan's hand found his father's hidden .45. What had his father protected all these years? And why were they both about to die for it? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months earlier, Ethan Morrison had been staring at his last can of beans in a Seattle studio apartment that smelled like failure and broken dreams. The electricity had been shut off 3 days ago, and his bank account showed a balance that wouldn't buy a decent meal. At 34, the former Army Ranger looked like a man who'd been fighting a war he couldn't win. Hollow cheeks, clothes that hung loose on his tall frame, and green eyes that had seen too much in Afghanistan's dusty hell. The phone call from Pemberton Associates had sounded like a scam. "Mr. Morrison, I'm calling regarding your father's estate. Jackson Morrison has left you property in Oregon." Ethan hadn't spoken to his father in 8 years, not since the old man had chosen his precious gas station over attending his son's Purple Heart ceremony. The lawyer's voice had been clinical, detached. "The inheritance includes Morrison's last stop gas station and all contents therein, including a bear." "A what?" "A bear, sir. The will is quite specific. You inherit everything or nothing." 2 days later, Ethan's rusted pickup truck wheezed to a stop in front of Morrison's last stop on Highway 26, deep in Oregon's Cascade Mountains. The gas station looked like something from a Norman Rockwell painting that had been left out in the rain too long. Faded red paint, vintage pumps that somehow still worked, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Last Chance for 50 miles." Behind the building, a professional-grade chain-link enclosure housed the most magnificent and terrifying creature Ethan had ever seen. Ranger was massive, 800 pounds of Kodiak bear with fur the color of autumn leaves and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to study Ethan with unsettling intensity. The bear didn't pace or show aggression, he simply sat and watched, as if he'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. Dorothy Caldwell, the 72-year-old woman from across the highway, had shuffled over with a plate of cookies and a lifetime of local knowledge. "Your daddy loved that bear like family," she'd said, her weathered hands steady as she poured coffee. "Raised him from a cub after his mama got hit by a logging truck. Been together 15 years now. That bear's got more sense than most folks around here, I tell you what." The local veterinarian, Dr. Samuel Peterson, had been less sentimental but equally respectful. "Rangers trained, healthy, and registered with the state wildlife department. Your father spent a fortune on proper permits and care. That bear responds to over 50 commands and has never shown aggression toward humans. Still, he's wild at heart. Respect that, and you'll do fine." Ethan had stood at the fence that first evening, watching Ranger watch him back. The bear's presence was oddly comforting, like having a massive, furry sentinel standing guard. Something about those intelligent eyes reminded him of the bomb-sniffing dogs in Afghanistan, alert, purposeful, and utterly devoted to their mission. He just didn't know yet what Ranger's mission was. The first week at Morrison's last stop passed in a haze of routine and unease. Ethan fed Ranger twice daily, massive portions of salmon, berries, and specially ordered bear kibble that cost more than Ethan's monthly food budget back in Seattle. The bear accepted his meals with dignified patience, always waiting for Ethan to step back before approaching the food. It was a dance of mutual respect that felt surprisingly natural. The nightmares came on the third night. Ethan jolted awake at 3 a.m., his t-shirt soaked in sweat, the phantom sound of IEDs still ringing in his ears. He'd been back in Kandahar, watching his squad leader Ryan Martinez laugh about his wedding plans just moments before the roadside bomb turned their convoy into twisted metal and smoke. The same dream that had haunted him for 3 years, the one that made him reach for a bottle to silence the screaming in his head. But there was no bottle here, and as Ethan stumbled to the window gasping for air, he saw Ranger standing at the fence. The massive bear was facing the apartment perfectly still except for his dark eyes tracking Ethan's movement. There was something almost human in that gaze, understanding, maybe even compassion. The bear's presence was oddly calming, like having a guardian angel that weighed half a ton. "You watching over me, big guy?" Ethan whispered to the glass. Ranger's behavior grew stranger by the day. The bear consistently pointed his massive head toward the back corner of the property near an old storage shed that Jackson had apparently never used. When Ethan investigated, he found nothing but weeds and rusted equipment, but Ranger's interest never wavered. More puzzling was the bear's intelligence. He could open simple latches with his claws, responded to complex verbal commands, and seemed to understand the rhythms of human emotion better than most people Ethan knew. And the town's reaction to the inheritance was mixed at best. Dorothy brought fresh-baked bread and local gossip with equal enthusiasm. "Jackson was a good man, but folks always wondered about that bear," she'd said, settling into the gas station's single chair with practiced ease. "Some said it wasn't natural keeping a wild animal like that, but I seen how that bear looked after your daddy, especially after the stroke last year." Dr. Peterson's visits were more clinical but no less revealing. "Your father spent thousands on Ranger's care," the elderly veterinarian explained while checking the bear's vitals through the fence. "Special diet, regular health monitoring, even dental work. That's not normal pet owner behavior. Jackson treated this bear like he was protecting a national treasure." The first real threat came on day 7. Ethan was restocking the convenience store shelves when a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the pumps. 2 people emerged, a woman in an expensive suit and a man whose smile never reached his eyes. The woman looked familiar, and when she spoke, Ethan's stomach dropped. "Hello, little brother." Chloe Morrison Sterling had always been beautiful in that cold, untouchable way that made people step aside when she entered a room. At 37, she'd perfected the art of looking down on people while maintaining perfect composure. The scar on her neck, barely visible beneath her silk scarf, was the only imperfection in her polished facade, a reminder of the childhood incident that had shaped her hatred of all things wild and unpredictable. Brett Hawkins stood beside her like an expensive accessory. Technically Ethan's adoptive brother, Brett had been brought into the family when his parents died in a car crash. Now, 35 and successful in tech, he carried himself with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never been told no. "We need to talk," Chloe said, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "About this ridiculous inheritance and that dangerous animal you're harboring." They sat at the gas station's small table, and Ethan noticed how both visitors kept glancing nervously toward the back of the building where Ranger's enclosure was located. The bear hadn't made a sound since they'd arrived, but his presence seemed to fill the air with tension. "Dad's little experiment needs to end," Brett said, his voice smooth and reasonable. "You can't seriously plan to live here with that thing. It's a liability, Ethan. One incident, one tourist getting hurt, and you'll lose everything to lawsuits." Chloe leaned forward, her eyes calculating. "We're prepared to make you an offer, $5 million for the property. You can relocate anywhere you want, start fresh, get the help you need." Her gaze flickered meaningfully to his hands, which Ethan realized were trembling slightly. "The bear goes to a zoo or sanctuary," Brett added quickly. "Professionally handled, completely humane. Everyone wins." Ethan looked between his siblings, seeing not family, but strangers wearing familiar faces. "And if I say no?" Chloe's smile was razor sharp. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that. You have 7 days to think it over. I'd hate to see this get complicated." As they drove away, Ethan walked to Ranger's enclosure. The bear was standing at the fence, watching the Mercedes disappear down the highway. For the first time since Ethan's arrival, Ranger showed emotion. His lips pulled back in what could only be described as a snarl. "You don't like them either, do you, boy?" Ethan murmured. Ranger's response was a low growl that seemed to say, "They're dangerous, be careful." The morning after his siblings' visit, Ethan woke to find Ranger's enclosure gate hanging open. His heart hammered against his ribs as he grabbed the baseball bat he'd been keeping beside his bed and rushed outside, expecting to find chaos, destroyed property, maybe injured hikers, certainly an 800-pound bear loose in the Oregon wilderness. Instead, he found Ranger sitting calmly beside the old storage shed, his massive paw resting on a specific patch of disturbed earth. The bear looked up at Ethan's approach with what could only be described as patience, as if he'd been waiting politely for his human to catch up to something obvious. "How the hell did you get out?" Ethan muttered, examining the gate's latch. It wasn't broken. It had been carefully manipulated, opened with the kind of precision that shouldn't have been possible for an animal without opposable thumbs. Ranger huffed softly and pointed his enormous head toward the ground beneath his paw. The soil was darker here, recently disturbed despite being covered with years of fallen leaves and debris. Something was buried here, something Ranger desperately wanted Ethan to find. "You want me to dig?" Ethan asked, feeling foolish for talking to a bear, but somehow certain he was being understood. Ranger's tail, a stubby thing that seemed inadequate for such a massive creature, actually wagged. Ethan spent the morning in his father's garage, searching through tools that looked far too sophisticated for a simple gas station owner. Along with the expected wrenches and oil stains, he found surveying equipment, a high-end metal detector, and maps of the local area marked with coordinates and cryptic notations in his father's precise handwriting. The metal detector screamed when he swept it over the spot where Ranger had been sitting. 2 feet down, Ethan's shovel struck something solid, a waterproof case containing items that made his blood run cold. Military-grade communication equipment, still functional, encrypted hard drives, photographs of people he didn't recognize in locations that looked distinctly foreign and dangerous. And underneath it all, a letter in his father's handwriting. "If you're reading this, Ranger led you here. Trust the bear, son. He knows more than anyone realizes." That afternoon, Dorothy Caldwell appeared at his door with a pot of coffee, and the kind of serious expression that meant business. At 72, Dorothy was the kind of woman who'd raised 6 children, buried 2 husbands, and still had enough energy to run the local historical society. Today, she looked every one of her years. "We need to talk," she said, settling into the kitchen chair with a heavy sigh. "About your daddy, about that bear, and about things I probably should have told you the day you arrived." She poured coffee with steady hands, but Ethan noticed the slight tremor in her voice when she spoke. "Jackson Morrison wasn't just a gas station owner, honey. That man spent 40 years serving his country in ways most folks will never know about. The gas station was just his cover." "Cover for what?" "CIA," Dorothy said simply. "Your daddy was what they call a deep cover operative. Spent decades in places that don't exist on any map. doing things that never made it into any history books. This little gas station was his retirement assignment, a safe house for agents moving through the Pacific Northwest. Ethan's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as his hands began to shake. That's impossible. My father was just a man who loved his country more than his own family? Dorothy's voice was gentle but unflinching. A man who spent so many years lying about who he was that he forgot how to tell the truth to his own children. Honey, your daddy was a hero, but he was also a stranger to everyone who should have mattered most. She reached across the table and covered his hand with her weathered fingers. That bear out there. He was Jackson's partner for the last 15 years, trained from a cub to detect things that could get people killed, explosives, weapons, even when someone's lying based on changes in their heartbeat and scent. Ranger's not just a pet, sweetie. He's a living, breathing piece of classified government equipment worth more than this entire town. And my siblings? Dorothy's expression hardened. Started sniffing around about 6 months before Jackson died. Hired private investigators. Made phone calls to people they shouldn't have been talking to. Your daddy was worried, real worried. Said family was the one thing he'd never been able to figure out how to protect himself from. That evening, Dr. Peterson arrived for what he called a routine checkup, but felt more like a debriefing. The elderly veterinarian examined Ranger with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before, checking things that seemed far more complex than typical animal care. Your father asked me to give you this if anything happened to him, Peterson said, handing Ethan a sealed envelope. I'm just sorry it took me this long to work up the courage. Inside was a single key and a note. The real inheritance is hidden where only Ranger can find it. Trust him completely. Your life may depend on it. Dad. The key was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Heavy brass, with an intricate design that looked more like a work of art than a functional tool. But it was the look in Ranger's eyes when he saw it that made Ethan's pulse quicken. The bear recognized that key, and the excitement in his massive frame was unmistakable. As if responding to some invisible signal, Ranger rose and walked purposefully toward the back of the gas station building. He stopped beside what looked like a completely ordinary concrete wall and began pawing at a section that appeared identical to everything around it. He wants you to use the key, Peterson said quietly. I've been wondering for 15 years what Jackson was hiding back there. Ethan approached the wall cautiously, running his hands over the rough concrete until he found what he was looking for. A tiny keyhole, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The brass key slid in perfectly, and something deep inside the wall clicked with mechanical precision. A section of concrete swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Cool air flowed up from below, carrying the scent of electronics and the hum of machinery that had been running unattended for months. Sweet Mother of God, Peterson whispered. What was Jackson Morrison really doing out here? Ranger was already padding down the stairs, his massive frame moving with surprising grace in the confined space. At the bottom, motion sensors triggered soft lighting that revealed a room that belonged in a spy movie, not beneath a rural Oregon gas station. Banks of computer equipment lined the walls, their screens dark but still humming with electronic life. Maps covered every surface, marked with pins and routes that spanned the globe. File cabinets promised secrets that governments would kill to protect, and in the center of it all, a desk with a computer monitor that flickered to life the moment Ethan's footsteps crossed the threshold. A single message appeared on the screen. Welcome home, son. If you're reading this, then Ranger has done his job. Now the real work begins. Ethan sank into the chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he'd inherited. This wasn't just a gas station and a bear. This was a secret that people had already killed for. And if Dorothy was right about his siblings' recent activities, they were planning to kill again. Ranger settled beside the chair, his massive head resting on Ethan's knee. The bear's presence was steady and reassuring, but Ethan could feel the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. His father hadn't just left him an inheritance, he'd left him a mission. The bunker beneath Morrison's last stop revealed its secret slowly, like a grieving widow finally ready to share her husband's hidden life. Ethan spent the next 3 days descending into his father's underground world, with Ranger as his constant protective companion. The bear seemed completely at home in the narrow corridors and electronic-filled chambers, navigating the space with the confidence of someone returning to familiar territory. Jackson Morrison's computer files painted the picture of a man who dedicated his life to protecting a country that could never acknowledge his sacrifice. 40 years of intelligence work, from Cold War Berlin to modern-day cyber terrorism, all meticulously documented in encrypted files that required his father's passwords. Passwords that, impossibly, Ranger seemed to know. The bear would position himself at specific keyboards and tap certain keys with his massive claws until the correct sequences were entered. "Good Lord," Ethan whispered as financial records filled the screen. $200 million. The money wasn't inheritance, it was operational funding, accumulated over decades of deep cover work and carefully invested through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. Every dollar was documented, justified, and legally his according to documents that bore the seal of agencies whose names were still classified. But it was the surveillance footage that made Ethan's hands shake with rage. Hidden cameras throughout the property had captured his siblings' visits over the past year, not just the recent confrontation, but months of secretive meetings, often in the middle of the night. Chloe and Brett had been casing the property long before Jackson's death, bringing strangers with them, men who carried themselves like soldiers but wore the cold expressions of mercenaries. In one particularly damning video from 3 months ago, Ethan watched Brett hand a thick envelope to a man with distinctly Eastern European features. The conversation was inaudible, but the body language was clear. This was a business transaction, and the business was betrayal. The most chilling footage was from the night Jackson died. Ethan had been told his father suffered a massive heart attack in his sleep, natural causes for a man in his 70s. But the cameras told a different story. They showed Chloe entering the gas station at 2 a.m. with a key she shouldn't have had, moving through the building with the confidence of someone who'd memorized the layout. 20 minutes later she emerged, and Jackson Morrison was found dead the next morning. Ranger had been in his enclosure that night, sedated according to veterinary records that Dr. Peterson later claimed were falsified. Someone had wanted the bear unconscious while they murdered his partner. The bear's behavior suddenly made perfect sense. His protective positioning around Ethan, his immediate hostility toward Chloe and Brett, his desperate attempts to lead Ethan to the hidden bunker. Ranger wasn't just an extraordinarily trained animal. He was a witness to murder, and he'd been trying to communicate that fact the only way he could. Dorothy's condition deteriorated rapidly that week, as if the stress of finally revealing Jackson's secrets had exhausted her last reserves of strength. Ethan found her collapsed in her kitchen on Thursday morning, Ranger having somehow escaped his enclosure and crossed the highway to paw frantically at Ethan's door until he followed. At the hospital, Dorothy gripped Ethan's hand with surprising strength for someone so frail. "They know," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the beeping monitors. "About the bunker, about the money. Jackson told me they'd been asking questions, making threats." He was going to disappear again, start over somewhere safe, but they got to him first. "Who's they, Dot? Just Chloe and Brett?" "Bigger than that, honey. Your daddy discovered something in his last mission, something about arms dealers working with people inside our own government. Russian money, they said, Enough to start wars or stop them, depending on who was paying. Her grip tightened painfully. That bear knows everything. Jackson trained him to remember, to be a living backup drive in case something happened. Ranger's memory is the only proof left. She died that night, taking with her the last connection to Jackson's hidden world and leaving Ethan truly alone except for an 800-pound bear who held secrets that powerful people would kill to suppress. The pressure campaign began immediately. Within days of Dorothy's funeral, the harassment escalated beyond anything Ethan had experienced. Anonymous calls at all hours, dead animals left on the property, and strangers photographing the gas station from the highway. The local sheriff, a man named Collins who'd known Jackson for 20 years, seemed oddly reluctant to investigate. "Probably just kids," Collins said when Ethan reported the incidents. "You know how folks feel about that bear. Maybe it's time to consider relocating the animal, like your family suggested." But it was Dr. Peterson who delivered the most devastating news. The veterinarian arrived looking haggard and frightened, glancing over his shoulder as if he expected to be followed. "They came to my clinic," he said without preamble. "Federal agents, they claimed, but their credentials looked wrong. Wanted all my records on Ranger, said it was a matter of national security. When I refused, they made it clear that cooperation wasn't optional." He handed Ethan a thick folder. "These are copies of everything. Ranger's medical history, training logs, behavioral assessments. Your father documented everything, Ethan. That bear has been trained in ways that shouldn't be possible. He can detect explosives by scent, identify weapons concealed on a person, even recognize when someone is lying based on physiological changes. But more than that," Peterson's voice dropped to a whisper. Jackson believed Ranger could be trained to remember and recall specific sequences of information, like a living, breathing recording device. If that's true, and if the bear witnessed Jackson's murder, he's the only witness who can't be intimidated or bought, Ethan finished. The next morning brought Chloe and Brett back to Morrison's last stop, but this time they weren't alone. 3 men in expensive suits accompanied them, men whose faces held the kind of professional indifference that Ethan recognized from his military days. These were killers trying to look like businessmen. "Hello, little brother," Chloe said, her voice carrying none of the false warmth from their previous visit. "I believe you've had time to reconsider our offer." "Actually, I have." Ethan stood in the gas station's doorway, very aware of Ranger's presence in his enclosure 50 yards away. The bear was pacing now, agitated in a way Ethan had never seen before. "The answer's still no." Brett stepped forward, his boyish face twisted with frustration. "You're being unreasonable, Ethan. We're family. We're trying to help you." "Family?" Ethan's laugh was bitter. "Is that what you call murdering our father?" The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Chloe's perfectly composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "That's a serious accusation." "Do you have any proof?" "I have Ranger." One of the suits, a thin man with pale eyes and hands that never stayed still, spoke for the first time. "The bear is not admissible evidence in any court of law, Mr. Morrison." "Maybe not in court," Ethan said, "but people have other ways of seeking justice." Chloe's smile was razor sharp. "Be very careful, Ethan. Grief can make people say foolish things, and foolish things can have serious consequences. You have 48 hours to reconsider. After that, decisions will be made for you." As they drove away, Ethan noticed unmarked vehicles positioned at both ends of the highway, watchers making sure he understood that escape wasn't an option. He was trapped in his father's gas station with a bear who held secrets worth killing for and siblings who'd already proven they were willing to commit murder for money. That evening, as Ethan sat in the bunker surrounded by evidence of his father's hidden life, Ranger approached and rested his massive head on Ethan's shoulder. The gesture was so human, so filled with understanding and comfort, that Ethan found himself speaking aloud to the bear as if he were confessing to his closest friend. "I don't know what to do, boy. Dad left me this responsibility, but I'm not him. I'm just a broken soldier who can't even keep his own life together. How am I supposed to protect you? How am I supposed to honor his memory when I don't even understand what he was really fighting for?" Ranger's response was a soft, huffing sound that somehow conveyed patience and encouragement. The bear moved to one of the computer terminals and began tapping keys with deliberate precision. The screen filled with a video file Ethan hadn't seen before. Jackson Morrison sitting in this very bunker, looking directly into the camera as if he were speaking to his son across time. "If you're watching this, Ethan, then Ranger has shown you everything. I know this is overwhelming, son. I know you feel unprepared, but you're wrong about one thing. You're not broken. You're exactly what this situation needs. A soldier who understands sacrifice, who knows the cost of protecting what matters." Jackson's image leaned forward, his eyes intense with paternal love and desperate urgency. "They're going to come for you now, and they're going to use every weakness they can find. Your PTSD, your isolation, your feelings of inadequacy, they'll weaponize all of it. But remember this, Ranger chose you just like he chose me. That bear has an instinct for recognizing good people, and he's never been wrong." The video continued with detailed instructions for accessing emergency protocols, safe house locations, and most importantly, a network of Jackson's former colleagues who could be trusted when everything else fell apart. "The money isn't payment, son. It's ammunition. Use it to fight back, to protect the innocent, to continue the mission that I couldn't finish. And take care of Ranger. He's not just a bear, he's family. He's the best partner I ever had, and he'll be the same for you if you let him." As the video ended, Ethan looked at Ranger with new understanding. This wasn't just about inheritance or family secrets or even justice for his father's murder. This was about completing a mission that had cost Jackson Morrison everything, including his relationship with his children. The bear seemed to sense Ethan's resolve crystallizing. Ranger moved to a wall safe that Ethan hadn't noticed before and began working the combination with his claws. Inside were weapons, communication equipment, and one final surprise: adoption papers showing that Ranger had been legally transferred to Ethan's care months before Jackson's death, along with detailed instructions for the bear's continued training and deployment. His father hadn't just left him a bear, and he'd left him a partner trained for war. And war was exactly what Chloe and Brett had just declared. As Ethan checked the weapons and began formulating a plan, Ranger settled beside him with the patient alertness of a soldier awaiting orders. For the first time since arriving at Morrison's last stop, Ethan felt the familiar clarity that came with having a mission and a partner he could trust with his life. The countdown had begun. The siege began at dawn on the 48th hour. Ethan woke to the sound of vehicles positioning themselves around Morrison's last stop, black SUVs blocking both ends of the highway, unmarked vans pulling into the tree line, and the deliberate footsteps of professionals setting up a perimeter. Through the bunker's hidden surveillance cameras, he counted at least 15 operatives, all armed, all moving with the coordinated precision of a military unit. Ranger sensed the danger before the first vehicle appeared. The massive bear had been restless all night, pacing his enclosure and emitting low, warning growls that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. When Ethan emerged from the bunker at 5 a.m., he found Ranger standing at full height against the fence, his dark eyes tracking movement in the forest that human senses couldn't detect. "You smell them too, don't you, boy?" Ethan whispered, checking the weapons he'd retrieved from his father's cache. A military-grade rifle, sidearm, flashbang grenades, and communication equipment that could reach his father's network of former operatives if he lived long enough to use it. The phone rang at exactly 6 a.m. Chloe's voice was crisp, businesslike, devoid of any pretense of family warmth. "Your time is up, Ethan. We tried to do this the easy way. What do you want?" "Everything. The property, the bunker, the financial accounts, and most importantly, the bear. Ranger needs to be retired. Permanently. He's seen too much, knows too much. He's a liability that we can't allow to continue breathing." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "You'll have to kill me first. If necessary." Chloe's tone didn't change, as if she were discussing the weather. "But we'd prefer your cooperation. Surrender now and we'll make it quick. For both of you." Through the surveillance monitors, Ethan watched Brett emerge from one of the SUVs, flanked by the pale-eyed man from yesterday and another operative carrying what looked like a tranquilizer rifle designed for large game. They weren't planning to negotiate, they were planning an execution. Ethan activated the emergency beacon his father had left in the bunker, sending a coded distress signal to Jackson's network. Help might be coming, but it wouldn't arrive in time to prevent the immediate assault. He and Ranger were on their own, just like his father had been on that final night. The first shots came without warning. High-powered rifle rounds shattered the gas station's windows and punched through the walls where Ethan had been standing moments before. He dove behind the reinforced counter, his military training taking over as muscle memory overrode conscious thought. Return fire, assess threats, protect the asset, in this case, an 800-pound bear who was officially the most valuable witness in the Pacific Northwest. Ranger's response was immediate and terrifying. The bear had somehow opened his enclosure gate, a feat that should have been impossible given the industrial strength locks, and was charging toward the main building with the unstoppable momentum of a freight train. 800 pounds of muscle and fury, moving faster than anything that size had a right to move, aimed directly at the men trying to kill his partner. The first operative never saw him coming. Ranger struck the man with the force of a wrecking ball, sending him flying 15 feet into a tree trunk with a sickening crack. The tranquilizer rifle spun through the air, useless, as its wielder crumpled to the ground. "Jesus Christ!" Brett's voice carried across the clearing, high-pitched with terror. "Where the hell did that thing come from?" Ethan used the chaos to advance, moving through the gas station's back exit while the operatives were distracted by 800 pounds of enraged bear. Ranger was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. A force of nature defending his territory with the tactical awareness Jackson had spent 15 years instilling in him. The bear didn't attack randomly. He targeted weapons first, then communication equipment, systematically dismantling the assault team's ability to coordinate. But numbers and firepower eventually began to tell. Multiple tranquilizer darts struck Ranger's massive frame, and while his size meant the drugs took time to affect him, Ethan could see the bear beginning to slow. Foam appeared around Ranger's muzzle, and his movements became less precise, more labored. "Take the bear down!" the pale-eyed man shouted. "Use live rounds if you have to." That's when Ethan's military training merged with something more primal, the protective instinct of a man watching his family being threatened. He emerged from cover with the precision of a trained sniper, his father's rifle feeling familiar and deadly in his hands. 3 shots. 3 targets down, each bullet finding its mark in non-lethal but incapacitating locations. "Ethan," Chloe's voice cut through the gunfire, "stop this madness. We can still work something out." She stood beside one of the SUVs, using Brett as a human shield while holding a pistol to her adoptive brother's head. Brett's face was pale with terror, his tech entrepreneur confidence evaporated in the face of real violence. "Let him go, Chloe. This is between us." "No, this is between us and $200 million that should have been ours from the beginning." Her perfect composure finally cracked. revealing the desperate greed underneath. Do you know what it was like growing up with Jackson Morrison as a father? Never knowing where he was, what he was doing, whether he was even alive. And then to find out he'd been playing house with a goddamn bear while his children got nothing? Ranger had collapsed near the gas pumps, his massive chest rising and falling in the labored rhythm of someone fighting chemical sedation. Blood matted his fur where bullets had grazed him, and his eyes, though still alert, showed the glassy sheen of powerful tranquilizers taking effect. "The bear was always his favorite," Brett gasped, Chloe's gun pressed against his temple. "Even when we were kids, he cared more about training that animal than spending time with his family. We were just inconveniences." Ethan kept his rifle trained on Chloe, but his peripheral vision caught movement in the forest. More vehicles were approaching, but these weren't black SUVs. They were local sheriff's cars, state police, and what looked like federal vehicles with legitimate government plates. "Cavalry's coming, sis," Ethan said. "Dad's network was bigger than you thought." Chloe's laugh was bitter, almost hysterical. "You think this ends with rescue? You think any of this stays secret? The moment those agents start investigating, the moment they dig into what Jackson was really doing out here, everyone dies. The Russians don't leave loose ends, Ethan. They'll eliminate everyone who knows anything about their network." "Then why help them?" "Because they promised us protection, money, new identities, a chance to disappear before the whole operation gets exposed. Your precious father was going to bring down a network worth billions, and he didn't care who got killed in the crossfire." The first government vehicle stopped 50 yards away, and agents in tactical gear began deploying with professional efficiency. But they weren't approaching. They were setting up a perimeter, as if waiting for something. That's when Ethan understood. This wasn't a rescue operation. It was a containment protocol. Everyone on the property, Ethan, Chloe, Brett, the surviving operatives, and especially Ranger, knew too much to be allowed to walk away. The government cleanup crew wasn't here to save them. They were here to eliminate all witnesses to Jackson Morrison's final mission. Ranger seemed to sense the shift in dynamics. Despite the tranquilizers in his system, the bear struggled to his feet, positioning himself between Ethan and the newly arrived agents. His movement was slow, labored, but his protective instincts remained intact. "Listen to me, all of you," called a voice from the lead vehicle. "This is Agent Sarah Mitchell, CIA. The property is now under federal jurisdiction. Everyone present is to remain in position while we assess the situation." Chloe's grip on her weapon tightened. "They're going to kill us all, Ethan, every single one of us. The only question is whether we die fighting each other or fighting them." For a moment, brother and sister looked at each other across 15 feet of blood-stained gravel, both realizing they'd been playing a game whose rules they'd never understood. Jackson Morrison hadn't just been hiding money. He'd been protecting evidence that powerful people would commit mass murder to suppress. Ranger made the decision for all of them. With the last of his strength, the massive bear lurched toward the bunker entrance, his drugged brain somehow remembering that safety lay underground. As he collapsed beside the hidden door, his massive paw struck the emergency release, and the concrete panel swung open, revealing the staircase to Jackson's sanctuary. "The bunker," Ethan breathed. "That's our only chance." Chloe looked at the approaching agents, then at her brother, then at the dying bear who represented everything she'd hated about her childhood. For a moment, her finger tightened on the trigger, then she lowered the gun. "Help me get Brett," she said quietly. "If we're going to die, let's at least die with some dignity." As the three Morrison siblings helped drag an 800-pound semi-conscious bear into the hidden bunker beneath Morrison's last stop, Ethan realized that sometimes family wasn't about blood or love or shared history. Sometimes it was just about standing together when the whole world wanted you dead. The concrete door sealed shut above them just as the first government boot steps reached the gas station floor. Outside, Agent Mitchell's voice continued calling for surrender. But down in Jackson Morrison's hidden world, 3 siblings and 1 extraordinary bear prepared for what might be their final stand. Ranger's eyes found Ethan's in the bunker's soft light, and despite the drugs coursing through his system, the bear managed one last protective gesture, positioning his massive body between the Morrison family and the sealed entrance above. Even dying, he was still on mission. The bunker's air recycling system hummed quietly as the Morrison siblings faced their mortality in the sterile light of their father's hidden sanctuary. Ranger lay on his side near the entrance, his massive chest rising and falling in irregular rhythms as multiple tranquilizer doses fought through his system. Blood seeped from bullet grazes across his shoulder and flank, staining his beautiful auburn fur dark crimson. "He's dying," Chloe whispered, kneeling beside the bear with trembling hands. The woman who had spent 30 years fearing and hating this animal now pressed her palms against his wounds, trying to stem the bleeding. "Oh God, Ethan, he's really dying." Brett sat slumped against the computer banks, his face pale and drawn. "This is insane. We're trapped underground with a dying bear while government agents decide whether to arrest us or execute us. How did our lives become a spy thriller?" Ethan was frantically searching through his father's medical supplies, pulling out field dressings and emergency medications. His hands shook as he prepared an injection, something labeled for large animal emergency cardiac support. But his military training kept his voice steady. "Because our father spent 40 years protecting this country, and we were too self-absorbed to notice." Above them, the sound of systematic searching echoed through the gas station floors. Voices, footsteps, the methodical destruction of anything that might hide evidence. Agent Mitchell's team was being thorough, and it was only a matter of time before they found the bunker entrance. "Ethan?" Chloe's voice was barely audible. "I need to tell you something. About the night Dad died." "I know. I've seen the security footage." "No. You don't know everything." Tears streamed down her perfectly made-up face, leaving dark tracks through her foundation. "I didn't go there to kill him. I went to warn him. The Russians had threatened to kill all of us, you, me, Brett, if he didn't surrender the intelligence he'd gathered. I was trying to save our family." Brett's head snapped up. "That's not what you told me. You said Dad was hiding money that belonged to us." "I lied. I've been lying about everything for months." Chloe's composure finally shattered completely. "The Russians have been blackmailing me since last year. They knew about my law firm's offshore accounts, about clients I'd helped move money illegally. They said they'd destroy me unless I helped them get to Dad." She pressed her face against Ranger's neck, her sobs muffled by his thick fur. "But when I got there that night, I found him already dead. Heart attack, just like the coroner said. But there was a note on his desk, addressed to me. He knew they were coming. He knew what they'd made me do. And he forgave me." Ethan's hands stilled on Ranger's bandages. "Where's the note?" "I burned it. I was so ashamed, so terrified of what you'd think of me if you knew I'd betrayed him. So I took his spare key, made it look like I'd been there for another reason, but I never touched him, Ethan. I swear on our mother's grave I never hurt him." Above them, the searching sounds grew more focused. Someone had found something. Brett spoke up, his voice thick with his own confession. "The tech company's real business is money laundering. Has been for 3 years. When the Russians offered me a chance to clean their money through legitimate tech investments, I thought I was being smart, diversifying income streams, staying ahead of the market." He laughed bitterly. "I had no idea I was funding arms dealers until it was too late to back out." "So we're all criminals," Ethan said quietly, applying pressure to Ranger's worst wound. "Perfect. That makes this so much easier." The bear's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Ethan with visible effort. Despite his condition, Ranger managed to lift his massive head and press it against Ethan's shoulder, a gesture of comfort and trust that nearly broke what was left of Ethan's composure. "He's trying to tell us something," Chloe observed. "Look at his eyes." Ranger was indeed trying to communicate, his gaze moving deliberately between Ethan and one of the computer terminals. With tremendous effort, the bear managed to lift one paw and point toward a specific keyboard. "He wants me to access something," Ethan realized. He moved to the terminal and began typing, following Ranger's subtle movements until a new directory opened on the screen. Dad's final files, the ones he was compiling when he died. The screen filled with evidence that made all of their previous discoveries seem trivial. Financial records showing Russian money flowing through major American defense contractors. Communications proving that several high-ranking CIA officials were selling intelligence to foreign governments. Most damning of all, plans for a series of terrorist attacks designed to destabilize the American economy and trigger a profitable war. "Jesus Christ," Brett breathed. "This isn't just about arms dealing, this is about overthrowing the government." Chloe leaned over Ethan's shoulder, her legal training allowing her to quickly assess the implications. These documents could bring down half of Washington. No wonder they want everyone dead. With evidence like this, there's no such thing as plausible deniability. The bunker's lights suddenly flickered, and a new sound reached them from above, the whine of power tools cutting through concrete. They'd found the entrance. "We have maybe 10 minutes, Ethan said, his fingers flying over the keyboards as he began copying files to multiple external drives. "After that, they're coming down here to kill us all." Ranger struggled to his feet, swaying dangerously but managing to stay upright. The bear moved to a wall panel that Ethan hadn't noticed before and began pawing at what looked like a simple electrical outlet. When Chloe touched the panel, it swung open to reveal another tunnel, narrow, barely wide enough for one person, leading into darkness. "Emergency escape route," Ethan understood. Dad planned for this scenario. "But Ranger can't fit through there," Brett pointed out. "Even if he was healthy, he's too big." The bear seemed to understand. He looked at each of the siblings in turn, his intelligent eyes conveying a message that needed no translation. Go, save yourselves, complete the mission. "No," Ethan said firmly. "We're not leaving him. There has to be another way." Chloe was studying the escape tunnel with the calculating gaze of someone who'd spent years finding loopholes in impossible situations. "Actually, there might be. This tunnel connects to the old mining shafts that run through this whole mountain. If we can get the authorities' attention, create enough public exposure, they can't just make us disappear." "What kind of exposure?" She pulled out her phone, checking the signal strength. "Live stream, social media. Make this public before they can stop us. 3 government witnesses and a trained intelligence asset, broadcasting evidence of government corruption to the world. They can't kill us if millions of people are watching." The cutting sounds above grew louder, more urgent. Sparks began falling through the concrete ceiling as industrial saws bit deeper into the barrier separating them from their executioners. Ethan made his decision. He gathered the copied files, weapons, and medical supplies into a backpack, then turned to Ranger. "Come on, boy. One more mission." "We're going to make sure Dad's work wasn't for nothing." The bear managed to stand, leaning heavily against Ethan for support. With Chloe leading the way through the escape tunnel and Brett bringing up the rear, they began their desperate journey through the mountain's heart. Ranger moved slowly, laboriously, but he moved. Each step was an act of will, a refusal to let his team down when they needed him most. Behind them, the bunker's entrance finally gave way. Voices and flashlight beams filled the space they'd just vacated, but by then the Morrison family and their extraordinary guardian were already deep in the mountain's ancient passages, racing toward a confrontation that would determine not just their survival, but the fate of evidence that could reshape American intelligence forever. As they climbed through the narrow tunnels, Ethan realized that somewhere in this desperate flight, his broken family had become something else entirely. 3 damaged people and 1 dying bear, united finally by something greater than blood or shared history or even love. They were united by mission, by purpose, by the kind of loyalty that Jackson Morrison had tried to teach them all along. Above them, Agent Mitchell's voice echoed through the bunker. They can't have gone far. Find them. Find them now. But they were already gone, carrying their father's secrets toward the light. The truth hit Ethan like a physical blow as they emerged from the mountain tunnel into the gray dawn light. Ranger collapsed immediately, his massive frame shuddering with each labored breath, blood pooling beneath his wounded body on the rocky ground. But it wasn't the bear's condition that stopped Ethan's heart. It was the figure waiting for them in the clearing. Agent Sarah Mitchell stood 20 feet away, her weapon holstered, hands raised in a gesture of peace. She was alone, which made no tactical sense if she intended to capture or kill them. At 45, she had the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades in dangerous places, but her eyes held something Ethan hadn't expected to see: genuine sorrow. "Please don't run," she said quietly. "I know how this looks, but I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to finish what your father started." Chloe immediately positioned herself between Mitchell and the group, her legal instincts triggered by years of courtroom confrontations. "Stay back. We have evidence of government corruption, and it's already being uploaded to multiple secure servers. If anything happens to us—" "Jackson Morrison was my partner for 15 years, Mitchell interrupted, her voice carrying a weight of grief that stopped Chloe mid-sentence. "Not just professionally. We were close, very close. And when he died, I lost the most important person in my life." Ethan kept his weapon ready but studied Mitchell's face, looking for deception. What he saw instead was raw, honest pain. "You're the one he was supposed to meet that night, the emergency contact in his files." "I was 30 minutes too late." Mitchell's composure cracked slightly. 30 minutes that might have saved his life. By the time I reached the gas station, he was already gone, and the scene had been cleaned up to look like natural causes. I've been investigating his death ever since, trying to piece together who killed him and why. Brett, still pale from their underground ordeal, gestured toward the government vehicles visible in the distance. "Then what's with the tactical team? The containment protocols?" "Those aren't my people," Mitchell said grimly. 3 hours ago, my superiors ordered me to stand down from the Morrison investigation. When I refused, they sent a cleanup crew to eliminate all evidence, including witnesses. The team that raided the gas station answers to the same compromised officials your father was investigating." Ranger made a sound somewhere between a whimper and a growl, his eyes fixed on Mitchell with an intensity that seemed almost human. Despite his critical condition, the bear was trying to communicate something urgent. Mitchell noticed the bear's behavior and slowly approached, her movements careful and non-threatening. "Hello, Ranger. I've heard so much about you from your dad." She knelt beside the massive animal, and to everyone's surprise, Ranger allowed her to examine his wounds. "He recognizes you," Ethan realized. "Dad told him about you. Jackson showed him my photograph, taught him to trust me if anything happened." Mitchell's hands were gentle as she assessed the bear's injuries. "He's lost a lot of blood, but the wounds aren't immediately fatal. The tranquilizers are the bigger problem. They gave him enough drugs to drop an elephant." She looked up at Ethan, her expression desperate. "I have a veterinary trauma team standing by, but we need to move fast. More importantly, I need those files your father compiled. The corruption goes deeper than you can imagine, and without his evidence, we can't stop what's coming." Chloe stepped forward, her years of legal training making her naturally suspicious. "How do we know you're really on our side? How do we know this isn't just another layer of deception?" In response, Mitchell pulled out her phone and showed them a video message. Jackson Morrison's face filled the screen, sitting in the very bunker they'd just escaped from. "Sarah, if you're showing this to my children, then the worst has happened. I trust you to protect them and to finish what we started. The bear will know if you're lying. Ranger can sense deception in ways humans can't. If he accepts you, then you have my family's permission to do whatever it takes to expose the truth." As if responding to his name in the recording, Ranger lifted his massive head and looked directly at Mitchell. For a long moment, bear and human stared at each other. Then, with tremendous effort, Ranger extended one enormous paw and placed it gently on Mitchell's hand. "He's giving you his approval," Ethan said, understanding flooding through him. "Dad trained him to be a living lie detector. If Ranger trusts you, then you really were his partner." But even as relief began to wash over them, the sound of helicopters approached from the south. Black military aircraft moving fast and low, heading directly for their position. "The cleanup crew," Mitchell said, her voice tight with urgency. "They're not taking any chances this time. We need to move now." She activated a device that looked like a standard GPS unit, but emitted a coded signal. Within minutes, a different helicopter appeared from the north, this one marked with medical symbols and flying the kind of approach pattern that suggested rescue rather than assault. "Veterinary trauma team," Mitchell explained as the aircraft settled into the clearing. "Dr. Elena Rodriguez is the best exotic animal surgeon on the West Coast. If anyone can save Ranger, it's her." As the medical team carefully loaded the massive bear onto a specialized stretcher, Dr. Rodriguez worked with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd handled similar emergencies before. "Gunshot wounds are superficial, but he's got enough tranquilizer in his system to stop his heart. We need to get him to my facility immediately." "Where?" Ethan demanded, unwilling to let Ranger disappear into government custody. "Private veterinary hospital in Portland," Rodriguez replied. "Completely independent outside government oversight. Your father set up the arrangements years ago, just in case." As Ranger was loaded into the medical helicopter, he managed to lift his head one last time, his eyes finding Ethan's across the chaotic activity. The message in that gaze was clear. Complete the mission. Don't let this be for nothing. Mitchell ushered the siblings toward a second aircraft, a civilian helicopter that had appeared as if summoned. "We need to get you somewhere safe while Dr. Rodriguez works on Ranger. The files your father compiled need to be verified and prepared for public release." "Public release?" Brett asked. "Shouldn't this go through proper government channels?" Mitchell's laugh was bitter. "The proper government channels are compromised. Half the officials who should be investigating this corruption are the ones perpetrating it. The only way to ensure justice is to make everything public, simultaneously, massively, undeniably." As they lifted off, Ethan watched the medical helicopter carrying Ranger disappear toward Portland. Below them, the black military aircraft were landing at Morrison's last stop, but they were too late. The secrets were already in the wind. During the flight to Mitchell's safe house, a ranch in the Columbia River Gorge, Chloe began organizing the evidence with the methodical precision of a prosecutor building a case. Financial records, communication intercepts, assassination orders, and most damning of all, detailed plans for false flag operations designed to justify increased military spending and expanded surveillance powers. "This is bigger than we thought," she said, her voice grim as she reviewed the files. "The Russian connection is just one tentacle. There are Chinese agents, Middle Eastern terrorists, even domestic extremist groups, all being manipulated by the same network of corrupt officials." Brett, whose tech expertise proved invaluable in organizing the digital evidence, discovered something that made his face go pale. "Ethan, look at this. The next planned operation, it's targeting a veterans hospital in Seattle. 300 patients, including a ward full of PTSD cases. When? Tomorrow night." The weight of responsibility settled on Ethan's shoulders like a lead blanket. It wasn't enough to expose the corruption. They had to prevent a mass casualty event that would claim the lives of men and women who'd already sacrificed everything for their country. Mitchell was already on the phone, coordinating with what she called clean agents, CIA and FBI personnel who hadn't been compromised by the corruption network. We have maybe 18 hours to prevent this attack and simultaneously release the evidence. If we fail at either task, hundreds of people die and the conspiracy goes deeper underground. As evening fell, they received word from Dr. Rodriguez. Ranger had survived the surgery and was stable, though still critical. The bear was alive, conscious, and according to the veterinarian, showing remarkable resilience for an animal that had endured so much trauma. "He keeps looking toward the door," Rodriguez reported via secure video link, "like he's waiting for someone. Animals often have stronger recovery rates when they have something to fight for." That night, as Ethan sat in the safe house reviewing plans for the next day's coordinated operation, he realized that everything had changed. He was no longer just a broken veteran trying to understand his father's legacy. He was the son of a patriot, the partner of an extraordinary bear, and the protector of evidence that could save American democracy from destruction. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your bear is tougher than we expected, but tomorrow night, everyone dies. The Morrison family ends with you." Ethan showed the message to Mitchell, who traced it immediately. "Russian cell tower bounced through multiple servers. They're still hunting you, still planning to complete their operation." "Good," Ethan said, surprising himself with the coldness in his own voice. "Let them come. They killed my father, tried to murder my family, and nearly destroyed the most loyal friend I've ever had. It's time they learned what it means to threaten a Morrison." As he spoke, Ethan realized that somewhere in the past week, he'd found something he'd lost in Afghanistan, a sense of purpose, a mission worth fighting for, and the unshakable conviction that some things were worth dying to protect. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation. But tonight, for the first time since Ryan's death, Ethan Morrison slept peacefully, dreaming of an 800-pound bear who'd taught him that loyalty transcends species, and that family is defined not by blood, but by the willingness to sacrifice everything for those you love. Miles away in Portland, Ranger's eyes opened in his recovery room as if sensing that his partner was ready for the fight ahead. The Morrison Wildlife Sanctuary sprawled across 500 acres of Oregon's most beautiful mountain territory, its rolling meadows and ancient forest groves providing home to dozens of rescued bears from across North America. 6 months after the events that had nearly destroyed their family, Ethan stood on the observation deck watching the evening feeding, his heart full of a peace he'd never thought possible. Below him, Ranger moved through the sanctuary with the dignified grace of a natural leader. At 850 pounds, heavier now thanks to Dr. Rodriguez's excellent care and steady nutrition, the Kodiak bear had become the unofficial alpha of the sanctuary's bear community. A group of younger bears followed him everywhere, learning his calm, measured approach to life. The bullet scars across his shoulder and flank had healed into barely visible marks beneath his thick auburn coat, but the wisdom in his dark eyes had deepened immeasurably. "He's teaching them more than just bear behavior," observed Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who had become both Ethan's professional partner and personal companion over the past months. "Watch how he positions himself between the smaller bears and any perceived threats. He's passing on the protective instincts your father spent 15 years developing." Ethan smiled, wrapping his arm around Sarah's shoulders, as they watched Ranger demonstrate how to open the sanctuary's puzzle feeders, complex devices that challenged the bear's intelligence while providing mental stimulation. The massive bear's problem-solving skills continued to amaze visitors and researchers alike, though few understood the full extent of his unique training. The veterinary students arrive tomorrow, Sarah continued. 12 graduate students from 3 different universities, all here to study animal-assisted therapy for PTSD treatment. Ranger's going to be busy. The Morrison Sanctuary had become much more than a refuge for bears. Using Jackson Morrison's carefully invested fortune, Ethan had created the nation's first comprehensive program combining wildlife conservation with veteran rehabilitation. Soldiers suffering from PTSD worked alongside rescued bears, both species healing together through mutual care and understanding. The success stories were remarkable. Tom Bradley, a Marine who'd lost both legs in Iraq, now managed the sanctuary's feeding programs while using a specially designed wheelchair that allowed him to interact safely with the bears. Maria Santos, an Army medic who'd struggled with survivor's guilt for 3 years, had found new purpose training younger veterans in animal care techniques. Most remarkably, Staff Sergeant Mike Washington, who'd been unable to sleep without medication since his deployment, now spent his nights as a volunteer security guard, finding the bear's presence more soothing than any pharmaceutical. "Daddy, look!" called a young voice from the visitor platform. 8-year-old Lucy Chen pointed excitedly as Ranger approached their group, moving with the gentle care he always showed around children. "The big bear is coming over." Ethan walked down to the public viewing area where families gathered every evening to watch the bear's dinner routine. Lucy's parents, Dr. James Chen and his wife Susan, had driven 3 hours from Portland specifically to bring their daughter to see the famous bear who'd helped save American democracy. "Is it true he really caught bad guys?" Lucy asked, with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood. "He helped his family when they needed him most," Ethan replied diplomatically. "Just like all the bears here, Ranger knows how to take care of the people he loves." The full truth of Ranger's role in exposing the conspiracy had been carefully managed. The official story credited a team of whistleblowing CIA agents with uncovering the corruption network, while Ranger was publicly known simply as an unusually intelligent bear who'd inherited special training from his deceased owner. The reality that an 800-pound Kodiak had served as a living witness to treason and murder remained classified at the highest levels of government. The conspiracy trials had concluded just last month, with 17 high-ranking officials receiving life sentences for treason. Chloe had emerged from her legal troubles with her reputation intact, having negotiated immunity in exchange for her testimony against the Russian agents who'd blackmailed her. She now worked as the sanctuary's legal counsel, ensuring that every aspect of their operation met federal wildlife protection standards. Brett had surprised everyone by using his tech expertise to develop revolutionary communication systems for wildlife research. His guilt over his unwitting participation in money laundering had transformed into passionate dedication to conservation technology. The monitoring systems he'd designed allowed researchers to track animal behavior with unprecedented detail while maintaining minimal human intrusion. "Mr. Morrison?" An elderly gentleman approached the viewing platform, moving slowly with the aid of a walker. "I'm Harold Whitmore. I wanted to thank you for what you've done here." Ethan recognized the name from his correspondence files. "Mr. Whitmore, your grandson was in the 82nd Airborne, wasn't he?" "Marcus. Lost him in Afghanistan 2 years ago." Harold's voice carried the weight of grief that never fully healed. "But your program helped his battle buddy, Joey Rodriguez. That boy was drinking himself to death until he came here. Now he's got purpose again, taking care of these beautiful animals." As if summoned by their conversation, Joey emerged from the feeding area, his face animated with enthusiasm as he described Ranger's latest training breakthrough. At 26, Joey still carried the physical scars of an IED explosion, but his eyes held hope again. "Ranger's been working with the new cubs," Joey explained to the gathered visitors, teaching them how to trust humans safely. It's like he understands the difference between good people and dangerous ones. Dr. Mitchell says it might be related to his special training, but I think it's just wisdom. As the sun began to set behind the Cascade Peaks, the sanctuary settled into its evening routine. The bears retreated to their individual spaces, some to communal dens, others to private shelters based on their personalities and needs. Ranger always made his final rounds alone, checking on the smaller bears like a concerned father, ensuring his children were safe for the night. Ethan and Sarah walked the perimeter fence, a nightly ritual that served both security purposes and personal reflection. The sanctuary's success had brought media attention, government funding, and international recognition, but it had also attracted unwanted interest from animal rights extremists who opposed keeping bears in captivity, regardless of the rescue circumstances. Senator Williams called today, Sarah mentioned as they paused at Ranger's favorite evening spot, a rocky outcropping that provided a commanding view of the entire sanctuary. Congress is considering legislation to establish federal funding for animal-assisted veteran therapy programs. They want to use our model nationwide. And I told him we'd testify, but only if Ranger can come with us. The senator nearly choked on his coffee. Sarah laughed, the sound carrying across the peaceful evening air. I explained that Ranger is the cornerstone of everything we've accomplished. Without him, this is just another bear sanctuary. From his rocky perch, Ranger observed their conversation with the patient attention he brought to everything. The massive bear's intelligence remained extraordinary, though Ethan had long since stopped questioning the extent of his understanding. Some mysteries were more beautiful when left unexplored. As full darkness settled over the sanctuary, Ethan noticed familiar headlights turning into their main entrance. Dr. Rodriguez's veterinary van, arriving for her weekly health assessments. But tonight felt different. The timing was unusual, and Elena normally called ahead for evening visits. Something's wrong, Sarah said, her CIA training immediately alert to irregularities. They jogged toward the main building where Elena was already unloading emergency medical equipment. Her face was grim, focused with the intensity Ethan remembered from the night she'd saved Ranger's life. We have a problem, Elena announced without preamble. I just received a call from the Portland Zoo. 3 of their rescued bear cubs tested positive for a rare viral infection, something that could spread rapidly through bear populations. The state veterinary office is ordering immediate quarantine protocols for all facilities housing multiple bears. What does that mean for us? Quarantine, isolation of individual animals, and quite possibly temporary closure to visitors while we test every bear in the sanctuary. Elena's expression softened slightly. The good news is that if we catch it early, treatment is very effective. The bad news is that we have 48 hours to implement complete isolation protocols. Ethan looked toward the sanctuary grounds, where 43 rescued bears had found safety, purpose, and family. The thought of separating them, especially from Ranger, felt like a betrayal of everything they'd built. But as he watched Ranger descend from his evening perch and approach the medical van with calm curiosity, Ethan realized that some challenges were just new missions in disguise. His father had spent 40 years adapting to changing threats while protecting what mattered most. Now it was Ethan's turn to prove that the Morrison family legacy was built on more than just one man's sacrifice. "What do you need from us?" he asked Elena. "Everything you've got," she replied. "This is going to test every system we've put in place. But if anyone can pull this off while keeping the bears healthy and the program running, it's this team." Ranger approached the group, his massive presence somehow conveying confidence and readiness for whatever challenge lay ahead. The bear who'd helped save a nation was ready to help save his adopted family. As Ethan began coordinating the emergency response, he realized that happiness wasn't the absence of problems. It was having the right family to face those problems alongside. Human or bear, blood-related or chosen, family meant standing together when the world demanded everything you had to give. The mission continued, and they were ready for whatever came next. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or property. It's the chance to discover who we're truly meant to be. For too many of us in our golden years, we've spent decades believing our best days are behind us, that purpose belongs to the young, that broken dreams can't be rebuilt. But Ethan Morrison's story reminds us that life's most profound chapters often begin when we think the book is ending. At 34, he was lost, haunted by war, abandoned by family, drowning his pain one bottle at a time. Then an 800-pound bear named Ranger taught him something our generation knows but sometimes forgets. Loyalty transcends species. Love heals deeper than medicine. And real family is forged through sacrifice, not genetics. Whether it's caring for grandchildren, volunteering at local shelters, or simply being present for a neighbor in need, we have the wisdom and time to create bonds that matter. We've survived enough storms to recognize what's truly precious. The question isn't whether we're too old to make a difference. It's whether we're brave enough to let love transform our remaining years into something extraordinary. Have you ever experienced a bond with an animal that changed your perspective on life? What's one relationship in your life that taught you the true meaning of unconditional loyalty? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.